Alright, so now let's move to splines. Now we've seen that standard primitives are basically just meshes, which are polygons working together to create an object. So if we move to splines, now we're not going to be working with meshes, but with lines. So splines are basically just very smooth lines. So for example, let's pick a line. So if I pick multiple points, and remember that you can just right click to end the command, you can see that we have basically a polyline. But if I pick the line again and just click and now drag like so, this is basically just a very smooth line. But you can see that we have some breaks here in this line, which makes it practically a polyline. But what if I want to smooth this a little bit more? I would go to the modify and collapse this selection and this geometry, and let's go to interpolation. So here we see that it has only 6 steps, but what happens if I go and type in 100? This curve, it's very smooth now. Alright, so let's go back to our plus icon. Let's go for the arc, and here I can just create a curve like so. And remember that also splines have modifiers too. So for instance, I have the radius. I can control the end and start from this arc. And I also can give this interpolation 100. So when we're working with splines, it's better if we have 100 just to have a very smooth modeling. Here in rendering, something interesting will happen. So we have multiple options here. And what happens if I enable this rendering? It's going to create a solid out of this, or a mesh out of this line. And you can see that I have enabled in render, but I'm not rendering right now. I just want to see it in the viewport. But when we're rendering, it's better if we just check these 2 boxes. Now down here we have the radial amount. So if I increase the thickness and the sides, I'm gonna get a bit more precise mesh. So radial is for an organic shaped line, but if I go to rectangular, obviously this is going to change to a rectangle shaped line. And all of the splines have the same parameters or the same options as this one. So it's very interesting that we can turn this lines, or splines in this case, to meshes just by enabling these 2 options. And now we can just play around with the thickness and sides and so on. So let's go ahead and go back to our plus icon. Now we have the n-gon, which is practically just a polygon in which we can manipulate the radius and also its sides to make different shapes. We also have a text here, but the text now is not going to be a mesh, but it's rather going to work with splines. And let's just deactivate the rendering option. So let's go into the rendering tab and enable these 2. Now there's an egg here, so it's a funny spline to have here, but however, it's there for some reason. We also have a freehand, okay, so I can just draw whatever I want. And fun thing about this is that we can also turn it into a mesh. So that's a very interesting tool too there. Then we have the rectangle, the usual rectangle. We have an ellipse. All right, so there's our ellipse. We have a donut here. All right, so basically some of them asks us to just give an offset to all of these options. A star, so a star has 3 different parameters to it. So let's go to the modifiers, and inside the parameters we have the radius, radius 2, which are basically controlling the exterior vertex of this star and also its points. Now what if I want to turn this into a plane? So we can actually turn almost any spline or closed spline into a plane or a surface by right clicking and convert to editable poly. So this way we can start working with meshes again by using the splines as a starting point. So that's very helpful, and we're going to be working with that as we go through the course. Let's go back to the plus sign, and we have the helix now, which is another very interesting object. If we go to its modifiers, we can increase the number of turns like this, and also increase the radius from the bottom part and the top part too. The height is also controllable. So let's just add a couple of more turns there, and let's go to our rendering tab and enable, well, we only have to enable it in viewport for now. So I can just adjust the thickness and the number of sides just to make it a little bit more smooth. I can also go for rectangle if I want. So we can just create something really interesting from this. Now keep in mind that this is still a spline. In order to enable additional changes to this or options, we have to turn it again into an editable poly. So right click, convert to editable poly. And now if I go ahead and pick the faces or the polygons, so let's go ahead and extrude this by right clicking, extrude, and something like this. Now let's just hit this check. Let's go back to our plus icon, and here we have this section. Okay, so before we click this, let's just extrude this to make an example. So I'm going to go for my 4 key. Now right click, extrude. Let's just give it some extrusion there. And again, I'm going to hit the 4 to unselect this. I'm going to go to my plus icon and my section. And now in the section, let's just select this manually and the section boundary. Because if we select the infinite now, it's going to basically just cut all of the objects that I have in my viewport. So it's better if we just select the section boundary when using this tool. So let's go ahead and just create this section. Okay, now let's move it a little bit over here. So what this tool is going to do is going to just slice this particular object or whatever is inside this region, and it's going to slice it to create a section. So I'm going to go to the modifiers while selecting the section, and I'm going to just click on update section. So as you can see, I've just created a contour of this object in which where my section was placed. And I can also go ahead and pick the create shape option, and I'm going to click OK for now. All right. And now what it has done is that it has converted this line that's been sliced into an object. So this, it's basically just another spline, but because we're enabling the rectangular shaped tool, we have this shape right now. All right, so that's it for splines. Next up, we have this bulb icon, and the bulb icon, we're not going to be using it right now as this is for light creation. So we can go to Corona if you have it installed. However, don't install it yet. As I've said in the first lecture, this is just an example that I'm giving you. And here we have Corona Light and Corona Sun, for instance. We're not going to be looking at that right now as we don't need to create any lights. We're learning how to model at the moment. Then we have the camera, which is also part of the rendering and animation process. Next we have the helpers, which is not very common to use. Then we have the space warps, in which we can create wind, gravity, or some explosions here. You can also link these warp tools with the option that we saw in the other lecture, which is the bind to space warp. So we're going to be covering that later on. And then for the next lesson, we're going to be checking out the hierarchy of the pivot. So until then.